Let me tell you what we're going to try to do. I've been asked to talk about understanding the hearts and minds of what we call high-capacity givers. I'd like to start by just saying how grateful I am for Campus Crusade and the role that it has played in my life. It is a profound one. I grew up with a profound desire to be rich. 5 weeks into my freshman year, I went on a Campus Crusade retreat. And they gave us an hour to go spend, have a quiet time with the Lord. And I took my sleeping bag and threw it out in a field and was praying and felt like God called me on the carpet, literally, and asked if I believed in who he said he was, and if I did, why was I so intent on holding on to my future, which included becoming wealthy. I wanted to be a millionaire by the time I was 30. And so that day, on a crusade retreat, I told the Lord I'd do whatever he wanted me to do. Ended up joining staff after college. And that my journey continued. The interesting thing was the money thing, for me, still wasn't totally solved. I had kind of surrendered my dream of being a millionaire by the time I was 30 as a staff person. But and maybe some of you can relate to this. I still wanted to be a rich missionary, okay? And so the Lord was continuing to kind of shape me. We ended up moving overseas, served in Russia for 4 years in the campus ministry. During that time, a close friend gave me a book by Alcorn, Randy Alcorn, that had just been written called Money, Possessions, and Eternity. And that book rocked my world and helped me see from kind of an investment perspective that I was laying up treasure in the wrong place. And so ended up coming back to the States, and that's when I started raising money corporately, and went to work for the campus ministry and History's Handful, spent 4 years doing that, loved that. Out of that experience, actually, was a part of helping to see Generous Giving started. So I would tell you this, my primary motivation for what I do at Generous Giving is not the liberation of resources, but the liberation of people. Okay? Not the liberation of resources, but the liberation of people. But here's the catch, and this is part of what I want to exhort all of us to. The catch is that when people are liberated, resources are liberated exponentially. So that's what drives me in what I do, and my hope for this time, really, is that all of you could capture or grow in your vision for what role you get to play in people's lives and encouraging them to embrace greater generosity and really greater surrender to Christ, because that's really what this is all about. I believe that's why Jesus talked about money so much. So let's talk a little bit about the hearts and minds of high-capacity givers. These are just my observations. I think that it's important, probably, and relevant to talk about the current environment that we're operating in. The world changed for high-capacity givers last September when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. And I will tell you this, if you still have your job, things are tight, people are struggling, but the people that have been hit the hardest in this recession has been those with wealth. Because the more wealth people had, almost invariably, the more they've lost. The reason I say that is not to feel sorry for the guy who has $100 million and now has 50, but the reality of the mental state that they're in is they feel poor. They feel like they have half as much money as they did last year. And so it's pervasive, and it's significantly impacting the way people look at giving opportunities. So that's a big issue. I see this, just parenthetically, as an opportunity to address spiritual issues with those people that you have meaningful relationships with in this particular area. And it's this passage that I'd like to reference, and it may have been referenced already, but this is kind of my life ministry verse for what I do. It's 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19. And it says, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to place their hope in riches, which are so uncertain, but rather to place their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up for themselves treasures in heaven as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. And I believe that's the punchline. We're inviting people to take hold of the life that is truly life in following that command, in inviting them to give and give generously. But that first verse, verse 17, says two things to the wealthy. Don't be arrogant, which is a problem for rich people, and don't place your hope in wealth. Well, guess what? Lots of people realize today that they were placing more of their hope in wealth than they thought. And I don't know if you all are seeing that. And unfortunately, I think that reveals the level of spiritual maturity amongst significant givers out there, that by and large, there aren't a lot of real mature, responsible givers, stewards. There are some. And one of my favorite conversations in the last year was with a friend of mine who's been a significant giver to Crusade over the years. And we were talking about his portfolio, how much money he'd lost. And he said, Todd, today I did something that I'm really excited about. And I said, what's that? He said, well, I chose not to renew one of my 2 country club memberships that was a $10,000 annual fee that I didn't use very much. And the same day, I gave $10,000 to one of my favorite ministries. And he said, I'm excited about that trade. And I think there are some out there that are doing that, that are consolidating their lifestyle and kind of re-upping or upping their game in the giving world. So what's it like to be wealthy? Most of us probably aren't wealthy from, kind of an American sense of who we're targeting as major givers. We could have another conversation about how we all recognize that we're wealthy as Americans, and I very much believe that. But for our purposes, in the context of these development discussions, what's it like to be a person of wealth? I have a friend who was speaking in front of a group of development officers, and he introduced himself as a cow. And I had not heard this expression prior to him sharing, but a cow stands for a child of wealth. And he described himself as someone who grew up wealthy. His parents kind of acquired their wealth as adults. His father was a first-generation entrepreneur, and so he kind of saw his parents become increasingly wealthy as an adolescent and into high school and college, whereas his parents were not born wealthy. Okay, so he said the money impacted my parents much less significantly than it did me. But he said, let me tell you a story that kind of illustrates, and I've never forgotten this story, I heard it 10 years ago, that kind of illustrates my life. And he says, I was dating a girl in college. We dated for a year and a half. I thought we might get married. I mean, I was, kind of head over heels in love with this woman. She broke up with me. And, that was hard, the breakup. He was disappointed. But one of his good friends saw this girl on campus a couple weeks after their breakup and said, hey, I'm sorry, things with, you, and we'll call him John, didn't work out. And the girl's response was, that's okay. There's lots of rich guys out there. And he paused, and he said, frankly, that's how I feel with most of you. I'm just a rich guy out there. And that's one of the issues that wealthy people deal with, that probably you and I don't have a lot of experience with, which is questioning why people want to be your friend. Okay, and that's a reality of this world of the wealthy. Here's the heading I have for this section of my talk, and it's obviously a very well-known saying. Seek to understand rather than be understood. Go into meetings with these kinds of people, looking for ways to listen and learn and put yourselves as much as you can in their shoes, because it's not easy to be in their position. And one of the challenges that we all face is that there's a perception that if you're wealthy, things are easy. Because so many people struggle with money issues, there's a perception that, man, if I just had plenty of money, a lot of the problems that I deal with, I wouldn't have. Well, the fact is, everybody has problems. They're just different problems. And oftentimes, they're far more complex problems. Here's another story from another wealthy, powerful man that was eye-opening for me. Actually, it was an interaction that I had while I was working for History's Handful, and it was a CEO of a Fortune 500 company in Houston. And we were talking, and for some reason, he kind of took me under his wing. He was an older guy, and he said, "Todd, do you have any idea what it's like to be me?" And I said, "No, I don't. Enlighten me." And he said, "Well, I have 10 to 12 meetings a day, and every single person that comes in this office has a problem that they need me to solve. And it's a really big problem, or it wouldn't have made it all the way to me. Somebody else would have solved it." And it was a real eye-opening experience for me to realize, again, what the lives of these people that have been entrusted with much are like. And he said, "So if all you're coming in to do is come in and ask for something from me, I have no time for you." But he said, "If you're here to bless, encourage, challenge me, that's why I meet with you." Again, just another little illustration of these realizations that are not part of my own life experience, but happen every day. The wealthy feel like targets. It's like they're walking around with a big birthmark of a target on their chest. And so how can we relate with them in ways that are different to really encourage them, to really serve them? And I want to break now, not break, but we're gonna go to this DVD. It's a 9 or 10 minute story. This is one of the things that we're trying to do at Generous Giving, is tell compelling stories of generosity. And I think this will give you a little insight into one couple that's quite far along in their journey, and then we'll pick up and talk a little bit about this story and how to encourage people.
When I saw it the first time, I thought it was the most beautiful farm that I'd ever seen in my life. And I'm just, being a banker, I saw a lot of pretty Kentucky farms.
Yes, you're a good
We
boy.
are both 7th generation Kentuckians. It's something we really, I guess it's in our blood. We really love this place.
I definitely struggle with greed and empire building and being too expansive, and that's my struggle. It's my absolute weakness. My little brother and I went into business early together, and I guess that when I look back on it, I just wanted to be rich. I think I was 19 and Vince was 17, and we sat around the room and we decided to be the wealthiest man in Kentucky. I liked selling, but I didn't like selling hard to sell products. And so we started thinking about the bank would be really good, because money everybody needs. And so it's much easier to sell. And so we got into banking business bought our first bank when I was 26, and started running it. We built the banks. We started buying a bank every 2 or 3 years. And it kept buying real estate. That's kind of been a constant in our organization, is just buying deals when we find them. And then in my personal life, I had I had a marriage that blew up, and mainly because I was way too dedicated to work. And I used to kind of think if you're having problems, if you could just be a little bit more like me, you'd be better off. And of course, then you learn it doesn't have anything to do with me, and I can screw up anything. And I really believe my divorce was a defining moment in my life. It's really a problem when the person that knows you best likes you least. That's a real problem. And I decided I just didn't want that to happen again. It's not attractive.
Jess and I met on a blind date. My cousin is married to a guy that works at the bank. They called up one day and said, we've got this guy, and he's 40, he's divorced, and has 3 kids. And I kind of went, oh, wow, I don't know. That's a lot. I'm not a big change person, and there I was looking at a lot of changes. Losing, my church, my friends, my job, my independence, my role as single career woman to married stepmother, and just all those things were frightening. It was wonderful because God provided so many confirmations during that time that yes, this is who I have for you.
I know that we're both our closest advisors. I cannot wait till, if I've got a lot of pressure or a lot of issues at work, I can't wait till I get home at night to sit down and kind of lay it all out and say, now what do you think about this? Is this, should we be doing this or shouldn't we be doing this? It's made our marriage a real partnership, which is absolutely invaluable. We want to be as successful as we can be while leaving faith and family ahead of our business.
And I think that's been the beauty of our organization. We have all been together. We've all kind of traveled this journey together. And sort of Jess's transformation is also the company's transformation, and probably, for me personally, a lot of my transformation. So it's been a journey we've all been on together.
Over the years, we've grown really through acquisition. We have acquired about 10 banks here in the state of Kentucky. We go from the Mississippi River in the west all the way to I-75 here in the eastern part of the state. We're in 10 counties. God's really kind of expanded our platform for ministry.
We want to use our influence, our example, and our resources to help people make wise financial decisions. Now that's very different from a bank. For a bank, we're a bank that's really encouraging you not to borrow too much money and to leave lots of margin in your life.
We have made Crown Ministries small group study available to all of our people. They understand now a lot of how we think and how we're motivated. As the company has prospered, a lot of us personally have prospered by virtue of the fact that we own stock in the company. We discovered a way through National Christian Foundation that we could give stock. They would, liquidate that stock and we could give that away. It's been a tremendous blessing to us and to unlock that value. That's been the primary way that we've been able to really increase our giving over the last several years.
We started a strategic plan where we would meet once a year to look over and really kind of develop a vision statement for our marriage. It's been really helpful to keep us on the same page, and not to say that we don't have struggles, we still do, but it is a time once a year that we sit down, we revisit a previous year's plan, make adjustments to it, and then we try to revisit it about once every 3 months. Do not acquire anything.
Very long.
This is for the whole year, but work on what we have.
We will give 10 or 12 times what, on a good year, what we spend. And I love what my father says. He says the antidote to greed is recklessly giving away money. And I think it's true. When just the very act of giving money away is an abundance mentality, and it just purifies your heart and soul, and it makes you dependent on God again to bring the next load in.
I've always had a heart for missions growing up. I really thought I was going to be a missionary someday. I mean, I just felt like I had a kind of call on my life to do that. And God has given that to me. Not because I've gone, but I've been partnering with people that are there. And that's been the most beautiful thing, really. I mean, it's just the best of all worlds because, I get to partner with people in all different places in the world that I would never have been able to go to personally.
Vince used to say that money is like manure. If you let it stack up, it'll start to stink. And he said if you kind of spread it out, it has potential to do some good, kind of like fertilizer. And it's true.
So what stood out in that story to you as maybe interesting or different Did anybody catch the ratio of spending to giving? So how many people know somebody like that? Just a handful. Okay, most people know nobody like that. Even the wealthy Christian families that some of us relate with have never heard anything like that. They've never seen a story like that. So it's powerful to introduce people to stories or other people who can share their own stories live. It reorients people's categories because they've never even thought that way. You mean you could give away 10 times what you live on each year? Kind of on an ongoing basis, and not because you're dying and you're giving away your estate, but you mean people actually do that? So that when we talk about how do we share the message of generosity, it's really two things. We tell stories and we ask questions. So one of the questions that I would ask somebody after watching a video like that, if you heard Jess talk about losing his marriage because of working too hard, has your pursuit of success cost you anything? I'm not assuming that their success has cost them something. I'm not saying how has your pursuit of success cost you, but it's an open-ended, has your pursuit of success cost you anything? That's a way to lean into somebody's life without judgment. And there's got to be some kind of a relationship, obviously, to ask that kind of a question. But that's what I'm hopeful that the people in this room can have these kinds of conversations with people as the Spirit opens up relationships and opportunities to ask those kind of questions. Asking questions expresses interest and concern. It creates an opportunity for discovery and dialogue. And it invites the person that you're asking the question to internalize their own answers. So it's much more powerful to ask questions than to give answers to people. Here are 5 ideas for encouraging others in their own generosity, or maybe 5 principles. The first is how I started this talk, that the liberation of people is more important than the liberation of resources. And I would encourage you to wrestle with whether you believe that or not, because I guarantee you, if you truly internalize that, the people you're relating with will experience you differently. Andy Stanley has said that it's not what we want from people, it's what we want for people. That's a paradigm shift in development. If you're there just for a check, you might get a check. Okay, I'm not going to say that doesn't work. But if you really want to take somebody to the next step in their journey and really see them give exponentially generously to the kingdom and to the ministry that you love and represent, I would suggest that you can't do it without caring about their heart and not just their checkbook. The second is that we cannot take people where we're not going ourselves. 1 Corinthians says, 11:1, Paul says, "Follow me as I follow the example of Christ." And so how are you doing in your own journey of giving, your own journey of surrender, your own journey of trusting God as your source? So another thing to reflect upon. A third thing, God is patient with me and you, and we should be with others. And sometimes that's hard, right? Because we're with people and it's like, oh my gosh, they just don't get it. But if we're patiently persistent, just as God is with us, people change. People change over time in relationship. The fourth principle is there's power in community. It's one of the things I most profoundly learned from History's Handful, which at the time I was working with History's Handful, they did a fantastic job of creating a sense of community where people were spurring one another on towards kingdom living and radical generosity. And there's power in that. So how can you, if you're in a geographic community, how can you encourage peers to be around each other, to sharpen? The way, actually, I ended up meeting Hugh McClellan, who funds generous giving and helped to start generous giving was I knew he was a significant giver to the Jesus Film, and I had heard his story, and I never asked Hugh for money, but I asked Hugh to play golf with a number of people that I had relationships with because I knew that Hugh telling his story would be more powerful than me trying to encourage somebody to be generous. The last principle is that there is no formula. And this is something that we get asked a lot at Generous Giving. Okay, what's it take to be generous? I mean, some of the real type A guys, the guys like Jess who are deal guys, they're like, how big of a check do I need to write? I want to be in the club. Well, there's no answer to that, Jess. What's the Holy Spirit telling you to do? And if there is a formula, it's this. It's ask God, be willing to listen, and obey what He tells you. Ask, listen, and obey. So, in conclusion, there's a profound need for what you all are doing because there are millions of Christians locked in bondage around holding on to their stuff. And I truly believe that if we approach this ministry, this calling, in liberating people and inviting them to participate in kingdom activities, there's a win-win potential, okay? And it's this. The giver wins because givers either need liberation or they need encouragement. If they've already been liberated, it's still isolating to be wealthy, number one. And number two, if you're wealthy and generous, you're really an outlier. And so many of the people that I'm friends with who are living this life of generosity feel, I mean, they don't actually come out and say, I'm lonely and I don't have any friends, but there's a sense of isolation in that journey. So meeting others and you all being an encouragement to that just increases the freedom and the joy for others. Mike, did you have something?
My question goes back to your statement earlier about has your pursuit of success cost you anything? I thought that was a good question, but it seems judgmental in the question itself. You had said something about not placing judgment on people, but when you say pursuit of success, doesn't that somewhat make a judgment statement of that's what you're doing is you're pursuing success, so therefore that's a bit of a judgment statement?
Yeah, that's a good, I'll take that feedback. I guess it depends on how you ask the question. And I would say that most of the people, most first generation wealthy have pursued wealth. I meet very few people who it happened accidentally. So there has been a drivenness to succeed. And that doesn't feel judgmental to me, so I'm not asking it with that sense of judgment. But I think what you're saying is a legitimate pushback.
Todd, two questions.
Sure.
One, do you have other questions like that one? Does it cost you anything that we could get hold of somehow, or I could get hold of somehow?
Yeah, I'll read a couple to you. What might be a next step in your journey of generosity? Have you ever given a gift that made you smile or even laugh aloud with joy? What are the possible benefits of simplicity in your life? What do you possess that you may be holding on too tightly to? Let me finish my 2 points, and we'll have another maybe question or two. I was talking about this win-win of kind of this approach to serving people this way. So there's benefit for the giver. I would argue there's benefit for you, the asker, because this creates a way to have deeper, more meaningful relationships with people, because it's not just about a transaction. It's about transformation. Now, again, I'm not saying I understand the reality of being a fundraiser. I'm not saying you can do that with everyone, okay? But I'm saying seek out those opportunities where you can meaningfully engage and pray for transformation, not just transactions. And I believe that will be increasingly fulfilling and rewarding in your lives as you follow God's call. And then I saw it in my time with Crusade. The ministry can win profoundly as well. Because as people are blessed, as people are challenged, as their paradigm begins to change and their practice of giving begins to change, there's so much more capacity for them to allocate. And so when I came back from overseas, I had this realization. I was really struggling with whether I was going to be in business or stay in ministry, and I was raising money for the campus ministry. And I realized kind of early on in that kind of corporate development role that if all I was doing was encouraging people to reallocate their giving pie, if I was talking somebody out of Navigators into Crusade, selling the features and benefits of Crusade, then I wasn't adding any value to the kingdom. But if my job could be to grow people's giving pie, then that's something worth giving my life to. And I believe that there's a great need for that in the marketplace, and I believe that all of you can do that in meaningful ways, and that's what I'm passionate about, doing myself and encouraging others to do as well. So.
Todd, thanks so much for your talk. My question concerns even with the Jess and
Angela.
Obviously, that process may be different for the husband and the wife, and you probably experience some disconnect sometimes in that relationship. What do you do to address those couple issues, and then how do we as development professionals enter into that? Obviously, we can speak into the man's life if we're in a relationship with him, but it is a journey of a partnership.
Yeah, that's a great question. How do you deal with the couples? There's no doubt that that's an area of dissonance. Usually, the husband and wife are not on the same page on who wants to be more generous. And it's not most of the time the wife wants to be more generous. It's just that most of the time there's a difference. And so one of the challenges that we've seen a lot is guys who are type A in everything that they do, get on the giving train, and and their wives are like, hello, honey. We get jokes about wives wanting to start, support groups for women who are married to people who go to generous giving. Because these guys come home and it's like, hey, this is great. No, we don't need new curtains for the living room. So it's really important. We always say that it's way more important to have unity in your home than to be more generous. And I truly believe that. And God's not asking you to be more generous to draw you away from your spouse. So how can you be patient to bring your spouse along on this journey? And then how can you create environments? How can you be intentional about cultivating that in your husband or your wife? It's one of the great things about our conference, or frankly, some of the conferences that you guys do, because you do them for couples, and they get away, and there's an opportunity for them to interact, relate around these issues. But that's a great question. It's really, I think, important to slow people down who are way ahead of their spouse. All right, we are going to close.